and welcome to today's book review, which is Practical Salesforce Architecture by Paul McCollum. This is a fairly recent book, came out in October 2023, so I'm really excited to be able to review this one. Looking forward to this one for a couple of reasons. As I say, it's a fairly recent and new book, which is always good. It's targeted at enterprise architects that aren't Salesforce architects, which is different from most of the books that I've read and reviewed. Well, at least for this channel anyway. And then the other thing is it's obviously by O'Reilly. Now, I'm a big fan of O'Reilly's books. I've got a ton of them on my bookshelves over there and around the house. And so it's really good to see them entering the Salesforce space as well. So without further ado, let's start reviewing Practical Salesforce Architecture by Paul McCollum. This book is targeted primarily at enterprise architects or people that aren't familiar with Salesforce but work in an architecture setting within a large organization and want to understand how Salesforce operates and how it maps to their existing knowledge so that they can start to implement it properly and really understand how to get working with it. This is quite different from most books where it's focused at Salesforce admin or a developer or someone like that. And for those that aren't familiar with what an enterprise architect is, in many larger organizations and on larger projects, rather than having specific architects who are just necessarily focused on a single platform, you'll have enterprise architects or a team of enterprise architects that are focused on putting together all of the different solutions and systems to produce the best suite of applications that interoperate properly for the organization. And so they'll typically have deep knowledge in things such as security, in integrations, in authentication, in things like different identity mechanisms, in performance, and just on how to build all these things together. So it's really kind of a layer up from what you might think of as an architect in the typical Salesforce space. Speaking of architects in the typical Salesforce space, though, these are people that are also a secondary target for the book, and it's designed to help those that are Salesforce architects, and many Salesforce architects come from non-traditional backgrounds. So they don't come from a very strict IT background or development background where you've kind of gone through a computer science degree or an IT degree or something like that. And so this book is really to help those architects understand enterprise architecture a bit better. So by taking a reverse lens of this is how Salesforce operates and how it maps onto enterprise architecture to help them understand how some different enterprise architecture topics work, some different concepts, what they mean, and really give you that first kind of toe into the water of enterprise architecture if that's something you're interested in as you start working with more and different systems. So it's a very good book, targets both those two groups really well, delivers for those two groups really well, I have to say. I found it very interesting, as someone who's been an enterprise architect on some bigger programs of work and who's been a technical architect and a solution architect on Salesforce projects and programs. I think this covers both areas really well. It's something I wish I had earlier on in my career to read through to help me kind of bridge that gap in different places. And this kind of brings me on to another audience that I think would really benefit from this book, and that's those who are in the Salesforce space who just want to understand some of the different terminology outside the space and communicate better with people who aren't Salesforce people. So Salesforce has its own nomenclature, its own language, its own terminology, and that can often be very confusing and off-putting for people who are external, and it can also be hard for people who are Salesforce developers, consultants, admins, architects, etc., to communicate with the broader IT space. And so this is a really good way of kind of understanding how Salesforce maps on some of those concepts, and if you have a job or a role where you're engaging with these other teams more broadly, or if you are wanting to build yourself into a position where you're going to move up the architect ladder or engage with these teams more broadly, then this is a great book for you, and it covers a load of stuff that I think is just really good best practice as well. So really like the book, and it hits those audiences really well. The book is split into 13 discrete chapters. Each chapter covers a topic or a concept from the world of enterprise architecture and goes through how Salesforce meets that requirement and how it maps across. So for something like security, for example, it will take the general enterprise concept of security within applications and then talk about how profiles, permission sets, groups, roles, sharing, the hierarchy, all of those things map across into the kind of more standard identity and access management kind of structure that you might have elsewhere in the world. The chapter's nice and independent, very clear and concise. As I say, it's only 150 odd pages, so each chapter gets straight to the nitty-gritty of what it needs to cover. It doesn't dive too deep, but also gives you enough information. It's a really well-balanced book, and Paul's done a great job there in making sure that it's not too in the weeds or too high level. And it covers everything nice and clearly. As I say, it's independent, so you can go back and forth. You can have this as a reference book on your shelf as well to grab off as you need. As I say, the book covers all the material really well. It does a good job of staying high level, but not too high level. It doesn't dive too much into the nitty gritty, so it really allows you to kind of get that right balance. Particular highlight for me was the later chapters where Paul talks, the start of the book, it's covering a lot of what I call groundwork for Salesforce. So if you imagine you're an enterprise architect who doesn't know Salesforce, there's a really good covering of how the platform works, what metadata is, some of the collaboration tools, how to deal with the constant changes in naming from Salesforce and what they actually mean, all of that good stuff. In the later chapters, Paul goes into detail around some more specific architect pieces that I think would be really valuable for particularly for Salesforce architects, but also for anyone working with Salesforce to kind of understand. So chapter 10 covers DevOps and related processes, and it's a really good chapter, not only because it kind of covers the high-level details of DevOps and the deployment models on Salesforce, but it also talks about some of the nuances that Salesforce has and some of the problems you get with Salesforce builds. And it introduced there's a term in there called darkitecture that I'd never heard before and never read before, which I will definitely be using now. It's a great term, and it's used to describe the kind of the patterns of your architecture that you implement that can actually lead to hidden dependencies and deployment paths that you're not aware of. So a good example is like a feature flag. So you might have a feature flag that you use to turn on and off different features in different environments, but that can leave you with a dependency that is not easy for you to understand if you then want to make an update to that area of functionality in the future. So it's a really good concept. It's really well explained. Definitely a term I'm going to be using now in the real world as well. And it's just a flavour of what Paul covers in a chapter like that. The chapter also finishes with a really good statement, which is that DevOps, like security, should have a little bit more than what you need, but not more. And it's a really good way of thinking about it, in that often people try and over-architect or over-deliver a system to have this seamless end-to-end piece where you have to have it so that you have to have it so that when you press save or press commit, everything runs and there's this big cascade. No, you just need to have what is going to be practical and useful for you and your organization at the time. So it's a really good, practical and pragmatic approach to things as well. Chapter 11 was probably my favorite chapter in the book because it discusses the role of the architect. Now, the word architect in the Salesforce space, I think, is often overused, misused, and can be dilated. And this isn't me saying that as a kind of drawbridging, only a certain elite group should be architects in their white ivory towers. What I mean is that Salesforce, by the nature of its system and the nature of the way you can build systems, means that you could end up making key architectural decisions much earlier in the delivery and at a more junior level of your career than perhaps you might make elsewhere. So if you are building if you were working on building an application and developing it from scratch for a business of 200 people, and it wasn't using Salesforce, you'd have a lot of things to consider about platforms and structure and kind of the broader architecture on that. And Salesforce takes all that away from you. And so the chapter I found was really, really useful because not only does it cover off some of the different roles for different architects in the program that you might not have come across, things like the UX architect. It was a really good discussion of that role, what that role should be doing. It's one that I hadn't really considered in many projects before, and it's one that I will be definitely thinking about, and is a role that I've probably done, and I know others have done, without even thinking about it. But the chapter really, really covers that material in detail and helps you understand what you should be doing as an architect and how you should be acting. So, documentation you should be producing, meetings you should be holding and running like the architecture review board, diagramming, some really good discussions around diagramming frameworks and what level of information should be included and where. And I think that's invaluable, because the hardest thing I think for an architect is knowing how to act. It's knowing how to give that correct level of detail to the correct people and to keep that documented and updated so that when you come back to it in the future, you know why that decision was made. And that's often not clear. That's often very hard to do and to keep up to date. But Paul covers it really well in here. So I think it's a great chapter for everyone to be reading, just to understand what a good architect can look like, what different roles an architect can play, and different types of architect there are. And to not only be able to hold yourself to account as that, but also if you are working in a team, to understand what different people's roles might be and how to work best together. Really good chapter there. There's lots of other good material in there. I won't go through every single chapter because I could be here forever saying it, but suffice to say there's a lot of stuff in here you will learn about, and a lot of tips you'll be able to take away and actually apply to your day-to-day life going forward as well. And just use as a reference to refresh you before you start your next project. So, in summary, I'd say if you're an enterprise architect who doesn't have a background in Salesforce, hasn't really used it before, and is either in an organization that's about to purchase Salesforce, work with Salesforce, you're about to get involved with Salesforce, get this book. I can think of a ton of times and a ton of projects where I've got into an organization that's got a big IT infrastructure, big technology infrastructure, and someone's just come to me and said, I don't get Salesforce, what's going on? And I would have loved to have just said, go and buy this book, let them have it, read away, and then come back and we can have a conversation on our terms. So if you're an enterprise architect, definitely get this now. And if you work with other enterprise architects, recommend it to them. If you are a Salesforce architect of any flavor, so technical architect, solution architect, whatever it might be, I'd recommend getting this book to help you understand the broader enterprise landscape out there and what enterprise architects are doing and how Salesforce maps in. We can often be slightly myopic and think that everything is in Salesforce and everything should be on Salesforce and everything must be on Salesforce, and that's not true. We're going to have to interoperate with different systems, going to have to interplay with them, and this is a good way of understanding what role you should be taking in that and how you should be working with others to do that. More generally, I would say if you are someone who aspires to be an architect on Salesforce, so if you're an admin, a developer, a consultant, whatever, you aspire to be an architect on Salesforce, but more broadly, you aspire to be a good architect regardless of what platform. This book is going to help you. This book will help you understand what a good architect does, what they look like, and one of the things that I would sort of reiterate here is that although someone has the role of an architect, architecture is everyone's job on Salesforce. It's, if you're a developer, okay, you might be given a design and a structure and an architecture by an architect to work with, but it's part of your good practice to make sure that you've documented it, you've explained it, you've diagrammed it, so that when something happens and someone else comes and looks at it, they get why. Because not thinking about these things in coordination up front can lead to real problems. I worked on a project once where I was delivering, I was in fact an architect that was dealing with Salesforce on Heroku. We had another architect that was dealing with Marketing Cloud, and then we had another architect dealing with the other systems, and then we had an overall enterprise architect. And I came into the project a little bit later after all these other systems had been sort of started and took over from another partner. And one of the things that happened was when we got to testing the Marketing Cloud integration, and they were using Marketing Cloud for kind of lead capture and sign-up processes, we found this big hole in the user experience and the performance where no one had actually sat down and drawn out how the requests were being made between the systems and the timing of it. And marketing, and so the plan was to use the standard Marketing Cloud connector and sync, and that has a 15-minute window. And so, people were signing up and then having to wait 15 minutes before they could log in, which was just sort of crazy. And so, we sat down, and part of that was just, we sat down and we drew out all of the integrations in UML, how they worked, how they performed together. And it just kind of made it easier so that the next set of developers, because, we finished the project, we left, new set of developers came in, and I actually bumped into one of the architects who took over, and was chatting to them, and they were like, "Oh, we found your diagrams; they were really helpful," and it made his life easier. People are going to look at your system, so this is a good book to help you understand what it is you should be leaving as a good citizen and a good architect for the project as well. So, just want to say thank you to Paul for writing a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend you get it. If you want to buy your own copy, there's a link to the book in the description below, so please click that link and go and buy your copy. Let me know what you think about the book if you've read it. Love to hear in the comments below what you think about it, what you liked. If there's a book you'd like me to review, again, let me know, and please remember to hit like if you enjoyed the video, and also to subscribe if you want to stay up to date with the latest content and our next book review as well, which is going to be Rocking Your Role as a Salesforce Admin by Jody Herbeck. So if you're looking forward to that, remember to hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, bye now.